Your Excellencies and friends, thank you for having me here. I feel that I don't deserve to be here, but in order for the voice of the Palestinians to be heard, I have no choice but to speak from this podium. I want to share with you a journey which I've made for 38 years. My day job is a consultant orthopedic surgeon in one of the oldest hospitals in the UK. It's founded in 1123, so it's going to be nearly 1,000 years old. And I'm the first woman appointed to the orthopedic department. But I'm here not to talk about British orthopedics or the Royal College of Surgeons. I'm here to speak on behalf of this. In 1982, while I was climbing the surgical ladder, fighting the way up to the top, I suddenly saw a country being destroyed and bombed. My heart couldn't rest. I'm a Christian, and I don't believe that this is what God wants any human being to do to any human being. To compound matters, the people dropping the bombs were Israelis. I grew up supporting Israel. Israel could do no wrong for a Christian, and it broke my heart. So finally, I resigned and went to Lebanon. And when I reached Lebanon, I found out the truth for myself. All the buildings destroyed, life destroyed, schools destroyed, factories destroyed, homes destroyed, children killed. And this is a 11-floor building reduced to a heap of rubble bearing 200 bodies. For a young orthopedic surgeon, it calls for humility, because I know that as a doctor, I could never bring these people back to life. But I can ask why. Soon after my arrival, a group called the PLO evacuated. At that time, being a Zionist Christian, I was happy that the PLO was going, because I thought the terrorists are going, so Lebanon would be left in peace. But I was so wrong. 38 years later, I can tell you, I made a big mistake. I was taken to work for the Palestine Red Crescent Society, and this was me 38 years ago, very young and naive. I worked for a hospital called Gaza Hospital, and I did not realize that I've got plenty to do with Gaza for the rest of my life. Gaza Hospital was one of the hospitals built by the Palestine Red Crescent Society. The rest of all the hospitals were bombed flat. Clinics destroyed. Gaza Hospital was bombed from the air, shelled from the sea, and it overlooked this. And of course, this was Sabran, Shatila. It was a refugee camp. In 1948, the Palestinians lost their home, and 800,000 of them walked across the borders of historic Palestine to find themselves in refugee camps. But over the years, the tents became containers and became buildings, and within these buildings, children were born and grew up, and the refugee tents became a town. The town of Sabra, the town of Shatila, and children were born refugees, they died refugees, they grew up refugees. But that moment of evacuation brought a guarantee from the USA under the Habib peace plan that the Palestinians will be allowed to go back and rebuild their lives. They will not be violated. The civilians will be protected by the multinational peacekeeping force. And each evening, I go down from the top of the hospital to make new friends. And from then, I learned about the story of Palestine, how they lost their homes, how they rebuild their lives, how they continue to believe that there's justice in the world, and there was no justice. I learned about their culture. I learned about their lives. I worked with Palestinian doctors and nurses, and all the time I was bewildered. Were these people really Palestinians? Were they PLO? Were they Arab terrorists? And it ran through my head. But they were very cultured people. I've not met any Palestinian terrorists, but I found Palestinian women embroidery, beautiful embroidery from the villages in order to remember where they came from. I learned a new cuisine, a new language, and I gradually fell in love with a wonderful people. They have become my family, but unfortunately, these 3 weeks of peace was suddenly shattered when Beirut was invaded by land. Several hundred Israeli tanks drove into Beirut and shelled their way into Sabran, Shatila, and the surroundings. The shelling came closer, and by about nightfall, people were being killed. I was in Gaza hospital, and I was expecting, as the BBC announced at the time, that Israel has come in to get the 2,000 terrorists left behind, but I found this kind of people being killed, babies. My whole ward was filled with wounded people, and when I took this picture, after I've been operating 48 hours, I came up and found my own nurse was shot. There are two nurses in this picture. The one on your left is Swedish. She's blonde, blue-eyed. They didn't shoot her. He, lying down, was a Bangladesh volunteer to the Red Crescent. They shot him. We saved his life. I came to look for a mother and a child who was put in a home and a grenade thrown. I operated on both, and they survived. I came up to put up blood for them, but found out that the hospital has run out of blood. We have the last unit. At night, the skies of Sabran and Shatila was lit by Israeli flares, and this continued. And the news on the BBC continued to say there was fighting between the PLO and the IDF. It wasn't the case. After 3 days and 3 nights of operating on dozens and dozens of patients in the basement of operating theater, my team was escorted out. And when we came out of the basement into the sunlight, we saw this. And at the time, my heart was broken because I know that the only identity my Palestinian friends had was a refugee identity card. We have not mentioned in a deal of the century the cancellation of Palestinian refugee status. When you have 6 million people just identifying themselves as human beings because they are refugee, and now the refugee status was to be cancelled by the deal of the century. This was a hard lesson to learn. Many of us will die. In fact, I think all of us have to die. As we are born, we will die. But how many of us will have to die refugees in this cruel manner? I refused to leave after the massacre. I came back to investigate. I've made new friends. I love them. And I realized a terrible thing has happened, a horrible injustice. I came back to the refugee camp and found out that homes they rebuilt were again destroyed. The walls are freshly painted, but the families no more. At the end of Shatila camp was a mass grave. Each year, many Malaysians and many people from all over the world will come to visit this mass grave. They call it Martyr Square. Now, if you look at it, you'll know it's a mass grave. There are white lime, there are fresh soil, there are bulldozers track. In this particular mass grave was buried 800 to 1,000 people. They are still there, and each year we lay flowers on the mass grave, and we call it the Martyr Square. I found children standing before the walls where their parents were murdered. I found children with nowhere to go for the winter. If you look at the clouds, the Lebanese winter was coming, and the Palestinian children has nowhere to hide. I operated on this child, the last. His name was Munir. He was shot 3 times with 27 members of his family, and when the bodies collapsed on him, he passed out, and that saved his life.